my earliest memories of the Foolery up in Traverse City would be when my buddies that played in a band called Zulu Groove, they came down, and I want to say the first time was with a band called Mondo Cane, which are Foolery legends, obviously. And they also, I think, they definitely opened up for 24/7 Spies at Union Street in Traverse City, and I want to say they did a little, run that included the Foolery, and I think the same thing happened with 13 Engines when they came through. They might have played down there with those guys.
I remember them from Mayfest, 13 Engines.
Yeah, so that was, I'm going to say, summer of '89, which is the very end of the Foolery era, and I would have been 21 at the time. And I was playing in a ska band called Cracker House that was friends with those guys, and they were like, man, you got to play the Foolery. It's the best. They got the apartment upstairs, they got the whole thing going on, stories about Harvey and the whole bit. And then obviously it closed not long after that, and it just fell off the radar for us in Traverse City. There was no longer a cool place to play in Mount Pleasant. Rubbles eventually kind of carried on in its own tradition, which I've played there a few times with the Dopes and a few other bands. But my real education on the Foolery started a few years later when Mark Camp moved to Traverse City from Mondo Cane. Jimmy Hicks, the drummer, also moved up there. And there's a few other guys. I think Pete Kehoe was down there for a while, and then up in Boyne City. And I started hearing all these crazy stories about the good old days at the Foolery. My buddy Don Julin, who I've played with many, many times in so many bands over the years, he was down there in '85 with his band, the Microtones, that opened for Fishbone and did a bunch of their own gigs. And so it sort of was just this one of those layers of percolating music history in mid-Michigan. I actually grew up in Lansing before I moved to Traverse City as a teenager. And so as we got to playing more and more shows outside of Traverse City, I was in a band with Mark at times and with Jim, and they really helped cultivate that same do-it-yourself mentality that the Flint kids were doing. And all of those guys remembered the Foolery too. We'd go over there and play for Joel Rash at the Capitol in the lobby or at the local 432. And so that's kind of where it all came, in terms of my awareness of it. Mayfest, I remember hearing about, because down in Lansing we'd have Cedar Fest, which was another big springtime, thousands of people brain fry. And then Mark Camp would tell me all about the Mayfest parties. And I missed out on those crazy apartment parties and all that kind of stuff. But I'll skip down to the 2009 reunion, because I was sort of like, there was a few threads coming together at that one. There was I played with the Dopes up in Traverse City for many years, and they were originally a Mount Pleasant band. So some of the original members that predated my time in there, I met down there. There was a cool band called the Roller Coaster of Tranquility
with John DeAgostini.
Yep, and those guys, man, so we had their tape through Bob Farmer, who ran the sound and did all that kind of stuff. Well, yeah, I worked for him for a while, and we'd go out there to work on his equipment and build cases in the driveway, and we'd raid his cassette rack. As you can imagine, he had tapes from every Michigan band at that whole era. And man, we fell in love with that Rumple Foreskin cassette that those guys put out. We're listening to Falling Pieces of the Space Shuttle and all that good shit. And then many years later, just a few years later, a couple of those guys came through with a band called Sink Bomb, which I think was an Ann Arbor outfit, but it was a couple of the same guys. And, they had the vocals running through guitar amps and delay pedals and a lot of the same good stuff going on. But Harold Richardson, in the intervening years, had gone to Detroit, and he was by this time playing with Easy Action, and my buddy Matt Becker was the drummer in Easy Action, so I'd been hanging out with him and John and Harold and those guys, and Tony Romeo, Fly on Tony, and so it was a bunch of different people that I knew. I was walking around with Mark Camp a good chunk of the weekend, and he'd been up in Traverse City for a few years and telling me all these stories and telling me all these names, and all of a sudden it was like, Mark Camp, this is your punk rock life. He's walking around at the Foolery reunion with everybody he ever knew back then. And a lot of those guys, Mark and Jim, they started bands, and then dudes that they were in bands with started bands. And they were super influential on me. I was around the same age, or maybe even a year older, but just the experience they had through the Foolery and those, traveling to Flint and Detroit and Wisconsin and playing around with Mondo Cane, yeah, it was a big influence on us. And to me, there's a lot of similarities in that Traverse City isn't as much of a college town, but it does have a fairly subversive college radio station. WNMC has been flying their own flag. They're not part of a network or anything like that. CMU had Destination Out on Sunday nights, and up here we had Cliff Murray doing the Mad Hatter's Radio Tea Party, and then Radio Free Jazz and a few other things. Yeah, Mike hit me up earlier this spring and was just wondering about coming up, and they're doing their big anniversary. I don't think he realized I'm a huge fan, you know what I mean? But I'm booking those concerts at the Milliken now. So, we just hooked it up straight away. We've got them coming up Friday, October 16th of 2026. And I've only told a few people, just like I'm telling you now. There hasn't been an official announcement. And I'm getting folks from Mount Pleasant hitting me up for tickets already. So that's a good sign.
All right.
We're really excited. Those guys, between, Destination Out was right up there with on Sunday nights, Art Bell was a repeat. You weren't getting live coast to coast AM like you normally would in the middle of the night. So you get Mike Johnston in there playing a little Sun Ra, little Abdullah, who just passed away this week or whatever. So yeah, those are super fond memories. And between the gig at the Foolery, which I'll call it that because it changed back for the night, and just John Staber was there hanging out at the reunion, and a bunch of those guys. He's a good buddy of mine up in Leelanau County now. And it really solidified a lot of those friendships, and like I said, it just put a bunch of stuff in context with people that I've known my whole life that grew up at the Foolery. And first time I really got to hang out with Harvey and actually get to meet him and talk to him a little bit after hearing about all of his exploits. There's no need to repeat them here, I guess. Huge influence on my musical career and my attitudes about what can be done. Actually, I have heard rumors that Harvey's planning on coming up for the Improvisers in Traverse City. So at that point, there's certain milestones as a musician where you finally got to play that stage, and the Foolery would certainly be among those for Michigan people or whatever. And so I'm just in the last handful of years gotten into the booking side of things, and just testing the waters there, and basically wanting to hook my friends up with gigs and bring my neighbors killer music and fun shit to do. And the idea that I booked a show that Harvey would show up for is to me, that's almost as iconic as playing at St. Andrews or Pine Knob or some iconic Michigan thing.